Okay, today we're going to talk about how to make 3 different kinds of charts in Flourish for the Flourish chart production assignment. The first one is going to be a set of radar charts. The second one is going to be a hierarchical bubble chart or a packed circles chart. And the third is going to be a stream graph. Try to make your assignment match the way that I do it in this video as closely as possible, but feel free to change some of the fonts and colors to match your own personal style. For this assignment, you will need to download data from the link that I provided. And when you do, when you open that link, you will see a page similar to this. And you'll be able to download each of these files all at once by clicking on the download button up here. That's going to download a zip file with all of these inside to your computer. You can also download each one individually if you prefer. Once you've downloaded the data, you'll need to create a Flourish account if you haven't already by going to flourish.studio and signing up with whatever email you wish. Since I already have an account, it's going to look a little bit different for me, but this is the home page and you can sign up by clicking Get Started for free. Once you sign up, you'll have a page similar to this, but again, since I've already created charts, it's got a lot of stuff here that you won't have. The important thing is that you'll need to create a new visualization. So you're going to want to click on that new visualization button. And the first visualization that we're going to create is the stream graph, which is a template that you can find in this first block of templates here, where it says starting points. And just go ahead and click on stream graph to open that template right up. Once you open it up, it's going to give you an example stream graph with data already in here. In particular, it's showing you what kinds of sales of music, different devices or different ways that music is consumed are available through time. So you can see that in this big block of blue, CDs were the dominant form of consuming music, whereas closer to the present time, paid subscriptions grew a lot, whereas CDs declined. So we're going to create our own version of a stream graph, but it's going to be about milk consumption instead of about music consumption. And that's just because I happen to have some milk consumption data that shows different kinds of milk consumed in millions, I think it's millions of pounds. So the first thing we're going to do is give this copy of the template our own name up here where it says Untitled Visualization. And I'm going to call it Milk Consumption Over Time. It's important to give your work a title like this. First of all, because it'll save it to your account. You can see it says saved over here on the right. But second of all, because that way you don't forget which one is which project is which topic, and it's easy sometimes to lose track of your visualization, so this way you'll make sure that you have the one that you need. All right, so don't forget to give it a title. Next, you'll want to click on the data button, which is towards the center of the screen next to preview. And once you do so, you will see the sample data that they have. But we don't need their sample data, so we're going to replace it with our own. You're going to click on Upload Data, which is this blue button to the right. And then you're going to find the milk consumption data that you downloaded from OneDrive that I provided for you, and click Open. Then you'll click Import and Next, select the columns. All right. Now, easily enough, this template actually automatically populated the values for us. And that means that this section on the right where it says select columns to visualize is actually correct. A lot of times we have to change it to make it match, the correct columns. But in this one, it was able to detect it pretty easily. So we can leave this just the way it is and then click on the preview button. Now you'll see that there's a little mistake here because it says 1 resident population, 2 weight reflects milk consumption. So there's something over here that's not a year. In order to fix that, you'll need to go back to the data tab in Flourish and scroll all the way to the bottom of the spreadsheet. You'll see there's some extra information here about the data, which comes from USDA, by the way, when it was updated, what milk content means, different explanations. So we don't want that. We are going to just go ahead and delete these informational sections down at the bottom and then scroll back up to the top and check our preview again. Now we can see that these years are correctly formatted on the bottom of our graph here. And actually the stream is looking pretty good. So we can see that this blue section reflects the total for plain milk, it says. Then we have plain 2%, plain 1%, flavored, not whole, buttermilk, skim milk, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you, because I'm familiar with this data, that total plain refers to plain whole milk, as opposed to plain 2% milk, for example. Since this label isn't showing up quite how we want, we'll go back to the data tab one more time and we'll change this to plain whole. And I also would recommend checking the other headers here to make sure they're all right, and it looks pretty good. We could change 2% to a percentage sign if we wanted to, but I think it's okay for now. All right. And for the average reader, unless they mouse over each section, they're not going to know what these colors represent. So I'm going to ask you all to go to the right-hand side of your screen where you see these settings over here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And find the section that says Legend. Open the section that says Legend and go ahead and turn that legend on. I'm going to click and drag to make this a little bit wider so that everything fits on one row like that. And then maybe I'll zoom out a little bit so that you can see. Now you can see that there are colors up here at the top and it explains what they are. Also, if you click on one of these, it takes it out. So if you wanted the stream graph to be more filtered, you could click on each of these to remove them and leave just the ones that you're most interested in. So this is an interesting feature of the legend. You can give your legend a title here where it says title, types of dairy milk, for example. Or actually, yeah, we could leave it types of dairy milk. That's all right, actually. Pretty good. We could make the text bold if we wanted to, and so on and so forth. If you wanted to, you could make this legend vertical too, but this is usually, a little bit more well suited to a different kind of chart. You can also put it below the axis here on the bottom. So that part's up to you. Now that we have our legend, we're going to need to change a few more things to make this chart more understandable to our audience. I'm going to close the legend section. And the first thing I notice is that this horizontal axis is pretty faint. The years are hard to notice and a little bit difficult to read. So I'm going to change that. I'm going to go to the x-axis section over here. And I'm going to change the formatting of these particular labels and how big they are. So we're going to go ahead and turn on this option that says styling next to ticks and labels and change the size to be larger. I also would like to change the color to be a bit darker. You can go ahead and do that as well. And maybe make the angle a little bit smaller. If you want to make it even more legible, you can make them bold. I also think the axis line could be darker. I think that'll help as well. You can see now this is a lot more easy to read now. And if you wanted to, you could even put grid lines, which are these horizontal lines, in the background. I think that looks pretty good. By the way, you can change the entire background color if you want to, by adding this option that says plot background and then turning the color on. You could even add a picture if you wanted to. For now, I think this looks pretty good. All right, the next important setting that we'll want to do is we'll want to change the header. The header of our chart contains the title and the subtitle. Now, I always say your title should sound like a headline. It should tell you a main takeaway of the chart. Let's go ahead and name our chart something to do with the diminishing amount of whole milk being consumed or being available in the United States. So we could say 2% milk is now more popular than whole milk. That could be a potential title. And we can use title case here, like this. Once we click away, it's going to appear on our chart here. This is okay, like this. We could also, spell this out. This is a small number, 2% milk. And then if we wanted to, we could include a subtitle. I recommend including a subtitle with some context about the data. So let's go ahead and say something like availability of dairy milk through the years in millions of pounds as recorded by the USDA. I think this is a little big, so I'm going to turn on the Change Subtitle Styles option and make it a little bit smaller by clicking on this little A here. All right, that looks okay to me. And now I'm going to go ahead and go below these header settings. I can collapse this section if I want, and click on Footer. The footer is important because it's where we include our source, our data source. So this is very important. Go ahead and put USDA for your source. And for your own personal charts, you'll want to include a URL to the original page where you downloaded the data. But since this is just an example, we'll leave it like this. Finally, you'll want to include your byline or your name. You could put chart by and then your name. And that'll appear next to the source. Under the accessibility section, you can add a description for a screen reader. Screen reader will read out what you put there in order to make this chart available to someone who might not be able to see it or someone who's using a screen reader. So I like to just use the same information that I put for the title. 2% milk is now more popular than whole milk. And then we could put a stream graph showing the availability of dairy milk through the years. Okay, that's pretty good. And now I think the only thing we'll need is something called an annotation. So let's go ahead and open the annotation section and turn on the option that says show highlights on the x-axis. Let's go ahead and mark the moment when 2% milk became more popular than whole milk. And it looks like it's somewhere around maybe 2003. It looks like in 2003 we have 17 million pounds of 2%. Versus, okay, whole milk is still slightly larger, maybe 2004. 2004 is about the same. So let's use 2004 and let's go ahead and put 2% milk is or becomes more popular, and then 2 colons and then the year 2004. As you can see, our text showed up with a dotted line. It's kind of small, so maybe not ideal. We could also make this a lighter color to make it show up better, like a white dotted line, for example. And we could change the color of the text down here where it says label. That might help a little bit. We could make it a little bit bigger maybe and put it on maybe the middle where the 2% milk is by clicking on this kind of middle line. And maybe increasing the max width so that more fits on one line. I think that's pretty good. We could make it bold if we wanted to as well. Okay, I think that's good, and that completes our first chart. If we wanted to, we could click on Export and Publish, and then Publish to Share and Embed, and then Publish again. And the link that you would use to publish this on Medium is this very first link here, the one that comes before the option that says Embed on your website. Okay, let's go ahead and click on the Home button to create our next chart. The next chart is going to be a radar chart. And you can create a radar chart by scrolling all the way to the kind of almost to the bottom in the template list, and then clicking on Radar with Filter. Once you click on Radar with Filter, again, it opens up an example for you. So we're going to create something similar to this. Multiple radar charts comparing different categories. Ours, however, are going to show different types of Latino media that exist in the United States and territories. So let's go ahead and rename this project, because again, we want to rename it to give it some kind of title that we know is relevant to our project so we can identify this later on. Let's go ahead and name this Types of Latino Media, and that's about right. Next, we'll go to the Data tab, and we'll need to replace this data, so click on the Upload Data button, and then look for Latino News Media Radar Chart Data, and click Open, then click Import, and then Continue. Now this time, our columns were not automatically set up correctly. They're kind of jumbled, and the automatic settings are not correct. The first one is correct, the name corresponding to the different states, but the values should include magazines and podcasts. So let's go ahead and change this values description to include column B, B through G to be exact. The filter here should also be the state, and the color category is already the state, so that's fine. Now these columns are correct, and we can go to the preview to check out our work. I'm going to make this a little wider. Now these are the top 8 states for number of Latino specific news media. So I've included only the top 8 here for you guys. And you can see that you can filter by state to take a look at one or another more specifically. So this is kind of a cool interactive feature that you could provide for your audience. All right, and you can also, click on the different ones in the legend, just like with the other chart. Now, there are a few things that will make this easier to read. One is making some of these tiny little blocks of color bigger on the radar chart so we can compare them more easily. So to do that, I'm going to close the Shapes option, and I'm going to go to Radial Axis. And where it says over here, Y scale, there's no max value right now. We're going to give it a max value of 20. Once we do that, some of the colors go outside the lines, but these small ones become bigger and easier to read. So it's worth it in my opinion. You could play around with different values like 25, for example, so that you can see what is the most worth it to you in terms of balancing keeping things within the lines versus keeping things large enough to read. But I think 20 looks okay. I also would like to make these rings a little bit darker where it says Y lines, rings. That's going to help them become easier to read. And the Y label, I want to make that nice and dark and increase the size a little bit. All right, so now these little numbers are easier to read. Finally, over here where it says X labels, we're going to want to make that darker as well and larger. I think even making this a 1.5 could work. Well, maybe that's too big. 1.2 perhaps. Or we could make them bold. That helps read the chart more easily as well. I'll leave that up to you guys. Maybe I'll make this all the way to black so it's even easier to read. Okay? So that looks pretty good in my opinion. If we go back to the shapes section, by the way, you can make these lines more curvy, more smooth, or you can keep them straight. If you want to, you can make this more of a star as opposed to a ring, but I personally like the ring format. And you can turn on the comparison lines if you want. That kind of overlays all of them on top of each other. But I don't necessarily think that you need that. So up to you. Okay, so this is basically what's required, just this part. And you need to include a title, just like with your other chart. So let's open up the header options here, and let's give this a title. Let's mention the fact that California has the most Latino news media as our title. I think that's an okay title. And then in the subtitle, I like to include some context once again. Let's go ahead and explain a little bit about these numbers. We could say something like, let's see how many newspapers California has. Let's go ahead and say with 26 newspapers, and let's look at pod or TV maybe, radio or TV. Let's say radio, and 6 radio stations dedicated to Latino news media. California has the most Latino specific outlets. And you can put whatever you want for this subtitle. I'm just including some more information here. And once again, I'm going to make this a bit smaller. All right, so that helps. Next, let's add the source of our data to the footer. For this example, I'm just going to tell you the source. Usually you'll have your own source, right? And in this case, it's called the Latino News Media Map from the Graduate School of Journalism of the City University of New York. So we'll just put City University, New York, or CUNY. And that appears down here. And then, of course, chart by and your name here in the note. Don't forget to put your name on it. Very important. That looks pretty good. And accessibility, very important to add something for the screen reader description. Again, we can just describe what we see here. Radar chart showing top 8 states for Latino news media. And then California has the most. Oh, by the way, we should probably mention that these are the top 8. So I'm going to go back to the header and edit this subtitle. And just add of the top 8 regions here to that. Okay, pretty good. I think this is fine. If you wanted to change the fonts, by the way, you can do that in the layout section. And there are a few pre-selected fonts for you to try. You can choose whichever one you want. Let's go ahead and use, how about Merriweather for this one? Okay. You can also choose a background color for the chart if you want to. Let's go ahead and choose like a little beige color here, just for fun. Alrighty. I think that's okay. And I'll keep it like that. Once again, you'll need to export and publish, publish to share and embed, publish, and then whether you're turning this in on Canvas or you're putting it on a Medium article, it's that first link that you need. Okay, let's go back to the home page and create one more chart. This time we're going to create something called a packed circle chart. So I'm going to scroll down once again to where it says hierarchy. And here we're going to go ahead and select packed circles. Now I'm going to go ahead and tell you that what we're creating for this is a visualization of COVID cases at universities in the United States. So we're going to rename our project COVID cases in universities. You can put universities and colleges. All right. Right now, as you can see, there are multiple circles that include different kinds of studios that produce movies, right? And how much money they made. And if you click on one, it allows you to zoom in and see the specific movies. So we're going to do just that. We're going to go to the Data tab and once again, upload our own data. Go ahead and click on COVID Cases by College, Packed Circles Chart, which is the CSV file that you downloaded. Click on Import and then click on Next, select the columns. Now in this one, it really didn't select things correctly. It even says no data to display. That's because the nesting here is really important and it didn't do it correctly. What you need to do for nesting is put the columns that represent the categories of the bubbles. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to start with states, which is column C. Then we're going to show cities, which is column E. And finally, we're going to show colleges, which is column G. So that's going to be the order of our nesting. C, comma, E, comma, G. Go ahead and put that in the first box here. Then for size by, we're going to size by number of COVID cases. So we'll put column H here. And finally, we'll filter by state. So we'll put column C in the filter option. All right. Now let's go ahead and click on preview. And we can see all of our different states with all the different cities and all the different colleges inside. If we click on Florida, for example, we can zoom in on Florida specifically, and we see the different cities. We could zoom in on Miami. And in Miami, we can see that the college or university with the most cases was University of Miami, with 3,000 cases at the time of this data being published. This data comes from the New York Times and the different numbers that they collect. And it was last updated in 2021, by the way. So that's what those cases represent. All right, so we're going to go ahead and click on this arrow on the top right to go back to the overall view. You can see it's glitching a little bit. There's a lot of data here. That's okay. It'll fix itself eventually. If this happens to you, you can just reload the page. And this is automatically saved to your account, so you can reload without fear. Okay, so I think this is pretty good. If you wanted a different hierarchical format, by the way, you could do that on the right-hand side where it says layout. You could change to a tree map or a sunburst or different kinds of categories over here, right? So this is kind of interesting to explore if you want to see how the same data can look in different formats. But personally, I like these circles. Okay, now let's go ahead and include some more information here. So I'm going to go ahead and change some colors. So we're going to open the color section and we're going to change our color palette to Pharaoh and Ball. Personally, I think this looks a little bit more serious of a color palette as opposed to the rainbow. And since we're dealing with COVID cases, a muted, serious color palette might do us some good. However, it kind of blends into the background, so I'm going to go ahead and go to the layout section, and just like I told you guys before, you can change the background color, so let's change this to a dark gray, almost black. I think that looks pretty good, but now this filter option here is really hard to read, so let's change that. Oh, while we're here, we can change the font, by the way, to a Roboto Condensed, for example. I think that looks pretty good. And now let's change this filter so we can see it better. You can do that by going to the controls section and then scroll down to where it says text color. Let's make that white. And then, oh, this is for the buttons. My bad. Let's go ahead and change it over here where it says drop down style, text color. Now this one can be white. Now when we drop it down, it's white here. Okay, looks pretty good. If we wanted to, we could change the background as well, maybe to something like a lighter gray. That's an option for us. And I think this little text that says filter is kind of hard to read. I believe that we can do that in the advanced settings of the control, where it says control title. We could change this to filter by state. That's not necessarily doing what I thought it would. I thought that would change this title over here. Well, that's okay. We can remove that. That might just be something that Flourish doesn't let us do. So we'll leave it the way it is. It's fine for now. We could also just change all of these to white just to see what is the one that works the best. But for now, I think that's fine. All right, so I'm just checking a little bit more to see if I see that color anywhere. It might be this one. No. Well, let's see. Let's check it out. Filter by state, maybe? Let's see. Maybe this one is the one. Okay, so that added another title. Interesting, interesting. Well, I'm not seeing that particular color setting. Sometimes it's hard to find things in Flourish. So if you find it, let me know. But for now, I'll just remove that. Okay, so you'll notice that the white text on the bubbles themselves is hard to read. So I'm going to close out the control section and I'm going to open up this labels section. This allows me to increase the label size a bit, so that's helpful. And if we go here where you can see the colors of the actual bubbles, where we change the colors of the bubbles, you can change the label color, and this time we'll make it black so that it shows up against the light colors. Okay, and I'm going to make those labels even larger, I think. Go ahead and make that maximum label size bigger. Okay, I think that's fine. Not too shabby. Okay, and now we'll need a title. So go ahead and include a header. And our header could be, maybe we're focusing on Florida. It looks like Gainesville has the most cases in Florida, so we could have that be our takeaway. Gainesville had the most COVID-19 cases at universities in 2021. And this is too light to read, so I'm going to go ahead and change this to a white color. Oh, you know what might help us with this filter text not being legible is actually if we go to the layout section and change the default text color. I think that's going to be what helps us. Yeah, that's what it was. So here in layout, next to where we picked our font, there's a text color that's basically the default, and that's where you can select the white color to change those texts automatically. Okay, side note. So going back to the header, we have our title, and then we have the subtitle. We could put here data from the New York Times, and we could put something like data about COVID-19 cases at colleges and universities comes from the New York Times. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller like before. Okay, and maybe increase the line height. Space that out a bit. All right, not too bad. Now, because the bottom of the chart is kind of far, you could put your name up here at the top to make it easier to find. Or you could put it in the footer as usual. In the footer, let's go ahead and add our source, New York Times, and that appears at the bottom as usual. All right. Don't forget your accessibility, screen reader description. Let's call this packed circle chart showing COVID-19 cases at universities in the United States. Okay. That looks good to me. Now with this chart, we're going to do something interesting. We're going to click on export and publish, and we're going to click on publish to share and embed like usual, no problem. But then we're going to click on create a story. When you click on create a story, it's going to bring up a completely new interface. And what this does, I'm going to make this wider. What this does is actually create a set of slides that users can click forward and backward to tell a story with subsections of your visualization. So this right now is an untitled story. Let's go ahead and give it a title, COVID-19 cases at universities. And then let's go ahead and specify that this is a story format, right? Looks pretty good. And to start, I'm going to go ahead and click on Florida to zoom into Florida, right? You see that? So for this one, you can see that within Gainesville, the University of Florida had the most cases. So maybe that's what we will put here for our caption. The University of Florida had the most COVID-19 cases in the entire state in 2021, according to the New York Times. That could be our first caption here. It's important to always include captions. Then what you'll do is you'll click on new slide where it says this button that says create new blank slide. And what you'll do is you'll choose the same visualization that you already used. So the same one again. So here we have it zoomed into Florida first. And now what we're going to do for our second step, by the way, if you want this to be automatically zoomed into Florida, you could also just change this filter to Florida. Same thing. For this one, we'll do the same. We'll filter to Florida first, but then I want you to click on Miami here. So we'll filter even further to Miami. And then for our caption, we could write something like Miami had many cases, or maybe like universities in Miami also suffered from many COVID-19 cases. The University of Miami had the most in the city with 3,000, how many was it? 3,097 cases, right? And now we're going to do a shortcut. We're going to click on this little button that says duplicate slide. Duplicate our slide. For this third slide, we're going to zoom back out by clicking on this arrow here. And we could choose to compare to another place in Florida if we wanted to. Or we could go to the national level and clear this filter. To clear the filter, you click on the drop down and then select all. And now we can kind of look and see, okay, which cities had the most at universities. It looks like Madison, Wisconsin had a lot, New York City had a lot, Ann Arbor, Michigan had a lot. It looks like perhaps New York City had the most. No surprise, it has the most population, right? Chicago also had a lot. So we could choose for our last step to zoom into New York and kind of compare the number of cases to the University of Miami, right? So we could look at New York City specifically, zoom in there, and then we see New York University had the most in New York City, and they had 2,389, which is still less than the University of Miami. So we could go ahead and add a caption that says, in comparison, New York University in New York City had 2,389, is that what it was? Yes, COVID-19 cases. And with that, we have our 3-part story. I'm going to go ahead and click on export and publish again. We need to publish the story, even though we already published the visualization. And then if I click on this link to open it up, I'm just going to show you what happens when you have your story. It kind of pulls it up for you. I'm going to make this smaller. And when the reader clicks to advance, it animates between the different settings here. So it allows you to kind of easily compare and contrast. And in my opinion, it's pretty interesting to do so. All right. So with that, you have completed your 3 Flourish visualizations, one of which has been put into a story format. And you are in good standing to try and create your own visualizations with Flourish and experiment with all of these different formats.